Hello, and thank you for joining us for another end-of-life parable. Today's parable is called Brick and Stones, and I have a helper today, and her name is Zelda. Thank you, Zelda. Thank you for helping me. Today we're actually talking about grief, and anything that you lose, you grieve. But in hospice and palliative care, we always think of grief as being when you lose someone that you love. And it is a heavy loss. It can be that you lost a spouse. You lost your wife or your husband. How does that feel?
Sad.
Sad. And is it heavy? Is this brick heavy?
No.
Well, I think if you hold it long enough, it will be sad. And another big loss would be losing a child. I hear that loss is harder than most any other loss because it's out of order. Parents always expect to die before their children, but that's not always the case. Sometimes the loss may be the loss of a parent. You lose your dad or your mom, and it could be grandparents. So it's a big loss in your life. And then sometimes the loss could be the loss of a best friend, someone that you really depend on and you really, really love, and they're as close to you as a family member. So I want you to keep holding that, okay, Zelda? Okay. Is it getting heavier? Yeah, it is. Okay, well, you can set it down here.
I can't hold it any longer.
Okay, that's because it's a big loss. But we know now that in hospice, sometimes we have some grieving that goes on before the actual death. And we call that anticipatory grief. And there's lots of things that we're grieving. Zelda, can you hold this? So we had the brick. Now we have stones. Okay? Is it as heavy as the brick?
No.
Not as heavy as the brick. But when a person is dying, they're losing lots of things. Maybe they're losing dreams that they had because they expected to live a lot longer, and now they have a very life-threatening illness and they have a shortened prognosis. And maybe they even are in hospice now because they have 6 months or less to live. So a loss of dreams. You know, I really thought I was going to be able to retire with my husband and travel, but that's not going to happen. I'm sad over that loss. I will grieve it. I really thought I was going to be able to work several more years. Can't work. I had the loss of a job. I thought I was going to be able to see my grandchildren graduate from high school or even from college, and that's not going to happen. I grieve all these losses of dreams. Other losses, my body's changing. I've lost my health. I grieve that. I've lost my ability and strength to walk. Now I'm on a walker. Okay? Then I may have to start giving up the walker and use a wheelchair. Oh, that's a loss of independence. Okay? I can't drive anymore. Okay? Can you hold that? Getting heavier? Yeah. And then I'm losing my appetite. That's a loss. Okay? And I'm having, sometimes I may even lose my faculties if I have something like dementia. Of course, I may not be aware of it at this time, but my family's grieving that I don't recognize them. That's a loss. Now, if you're a caregiver, like you work in hospice and palliative care, or you're a family caregiver, and you may have lots of losses, like I lost my patient that was my favorite patient, Mrs. Smith, and then I lost Mr. Jones and Mr. Goldberg. Oh, and then there was the little child that I took care of named Juliana, and I miss her. So all these losses of patients, even though they're not a personal family member, they begin to add up. How's that feeling, Zelda? Sad? How about, is it heavy or lighter?
Lighter.
No? Well, I think it's going to be just as heavy with time as the brick. Is it heavier now? It's getting heavy, isn't it?
Really heavy.
Yes. Now, what can we do with all these losses? Well, one thing is to recognize what it is. And even if it's anticipatory grief, we need to recognize what it is. And we need to get help with it. And join a caregiver support group. That might help because other family members are dealing with the same thing. Talk to your hospice team when you've had multiple losses, if you're a nurse or a social worker or a chaplain, and share that with your team because you need to deal with all this loss. And don't wait until you start burning out or have problems because it can affect your own health. And if you are a family member and you've lost a child or a spouse or a parent or a best friend, look for a support group in your community where you can talk about them and realize what's going on is normal. And it's hard to grieve. You have to get through it. You can't ignore it. You can't push it down. Hold this. Okay, can you pretend that you're not holding anything? Well, after a while, hold it higher. Okay, is it still heavy? You're going to start thinking about it, aren't you? Right. So get help, recognize what's going on, and then recognize these small losses as well. Because remember, they can affect you just as much as the brick. Brick and stones can have the same results. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to having another end-of-life parable with you in the future. Live well.